Hello everyone, my name is Jen and welcome to the Book Refuge. Hello my friends, Happy New Year and welcome to my December reading wrap up, alright? I am so excited to share this with you, and then later on this week we'll have my 2025 wrap up, aka my top 10 books of the year. I'm almost done with rereading my favorites, which is what I always try to do in December so that I can help decide what my favorite books are, and I can't wait to do that. But first, we gotta go through December and wrap that on up for you before we get into the new year. So I'm very excited to dive into this with you because I believe I rounded out the year pretty strong. I'm pretty proud of myself and where we went with it. So just to give you a bit of a heads up, if this happens to be the last wrap up of mine that you are seeing for the year or whatever, I don't talk about every book that I've read in my monthly wrap ups because I read a lot. I really do. I finished the year at 484 books. So monthly that averages out to about 40 books a month. And we just wouldn't get through all of them if we did that. I'd be here for hours. So I actually do weekly wrap-ups, which you can check out now. There are 52 weeks worth because, you know, it goes all the way through. And I have weekly wrap-ups there where I talk about every book that I read. And I wait till the end of each month to talk about my top favorite books, and I gush about them a little bit, and I just find that to be fun. So I'll have links to those weekly wrap-ups, and then I'll also have links to my favorites that I'm talking about if you want to purchase one for yourself. So before that, we'll go over a few stats real quick, and then we will dive in. And I'm so excited rounding these all out. I used a good amount of my journal this year because I've added more and more things that I track. And I'm so excited for my January journal. I've gotten that started and everything. It's so great. But let's start out with my stats. So I read 38 books this month, and that was 13,887 pages, which pretty proud of that. The formats of these books is there was 12 ebooks, 13 physical books, 15 audiobooks, and 20 ARCs. So one of the things I'll be changing this year, sorry, I'll just put this in there, is I have changed how I will track my formats. And I'm going to have ARCs and ALCs like separated and physical ARCs separate from each other. So that'll be nice. But currently I mush them all together. So that's why some of those numbers overlap a little bit, is sometimes I'm reading both the physical book and the audiobook listening at the same time. So that's what that is. The subgenres of these books were I had 14 contemporaries, 9 dark, 1 erotic romance, 3 fan fictions, 2 fantasy, 6 historical, 1 paranormal, and 2 sci-fi/other. And then the ratings for these, there is 9 6-star reads, right? Because I did reread. There's 2 of them that were new, which we'll talk about in my favorites part of this. But yeah, there was 9 6-star reads. There was 9 5-star reads, 5 4.5-star reads, 11 4 stars, 1 3.5 star, and 3 3 stars. So really good average rating for books this month as well. So that is my stats there. Now we're going to dive into my favorites, which, as I said, I did have 2 6-star reads that were new to me. And the first one I want to share is Jade Legacy. So this series, the Greenbone Saga, has shown up on favorites lists throughout the year as I read these books. I started this trilogy in September and I read one each month. So I did start this in November. It took me into December to finish it. But this was a series that was recommended by Crystal at Crystal's Bookish Life earlier this year. And there isn't any romance in this one. And I don't read a ton of non-romance, right? In the whole year, I only read, I believe I tracked it, I only read 8 books that weren't romance because they're stressful for me, that I don't find them super enjoyable. It's why romance is my main, category of things to read. And I'm okay with that. I have no problems with the main thing I read is romance, right? I'm absolutely fine with it. But this was a series that she just loves so much. I'm sure it's in her top books of the year. And there's just something about it. It was so well told. This is a series that we start with Jade City, and it is about this family who is basically like a mafia family or a crime family. And there's also some fantasy involved where they have special abilities that are granted to them through the use of jade stones. And so the more powerful you are at, like channeling it, the more like jade you carry on your person, the more powerful you can be. And then things are kind of set up like a mafia system, basically. It's like it is. There's different families that are vying for control. They run different criminal enterprises. They even have like some deals with the government. The government mostly leaves them alone in one of the countries anyway to do what they're going to do. And they're having like territory battles. And when this series starts out with Jade City, there is one of the siblings. There's basically 3-4 siblings that this focuses around. And I don't want to spoil how things go down with that, but we're kind of vying for control. But for the most part, we've been in a peacetime kind of before Jade City. Like things have just been how they are. And then there is a few events that really crank up the heat, and we enter into this war with another clan. And so throughout this series, which takes place over many years, we are up and we're down and we're fighting and we're getting one up on them and we're losing and people die and all these things happen throughout. And why this ended up on my top books and why this one became a 6-star read is that somehow Fonda Lee made me care deeply about these characters that again, we're not really in romance scenarios. These characters do fall in love with people. There is like a little bit of that, but the romance is secondary and even tertiary to the other things going on in this series by far. Like people getting married, babies being born, the only times it's really focused on is when it affects the family, right? So if you're looking for swoony moments and things like that to happen, don't come to this for that, because your heart will probably be broken too, because a lot of romances don't end so well in this series either. But she made me care about these characters without there being a romance, but with the family being the heart, which I guess isn't a huge surprise because I love family sagas at the same time. But this is also not in first person, so we're in third person the whole time. We also get like outside characters, POVs sometimes, people that are, like against us at times too. And so I didn't know how connected I was going to become. I buddy read the very first book in the series with my friend Jessin, and she wasn't as into it as I was. And I was pretty solidly intrigued after book 1. Like, I liked it. I gave it 5 stars. It was fun, mostly because I was buddy reading it with my friend, and my heart had already been broken a couple times in the first one. And I just decided to push through again because I knew how much Crystal liked these. And the audiobooks are fantastic, by the way. These are narrated by Andrew Cashino. Highly recommend if you read them to read it that way, because he just, like any great narrator who has a series like this under their belt, I hear this series and like view the characters like through this narrator's voice. Like that's who is them to me, And so there's something that makes you feel even more connected when you like hear their voice, and like that's the voice in your mind, right? And she made me care about these characters without the romance, without first person POV, without some of those things that I normally need in, even if it's a, other type of fantasy. I need the romance in there. I need to care about that more to do it. But she was so talented in how she did this. Before I knew it, was just completely sucked into them, and I was holding my breath at times, and there were a couple of moments of almost death where I was ready to throw the book at the wall because I was like, wait, this isn't a romance. This person could really die right now, and what will I do if they do? Like, it was so stressful. Some of the messages I sent to Crystal where I was just like, what have you gotten me into? Like, what am I living with right now? Like, it was so much. And so when we get to this book, and I don't want to spoil anything about it, besides the fact that this book does cover the most time of the 3. Like, the first one I think covers like maybe 2 years. The next one covers like 3 or 4 years. This one covers a lot of time, you know, which does kind of make sense because it's Jade Legacy, and we're setting up what's the legacy of this war that we've been in. What's the legacy that will be left for the Green Bones, which again, that's what the characters are called who can use Jade for power. And what will be left of this family by the end of it, you know, what will we remember them by? I also really love it because this is very much steeped in like Asian tradition. I haven't read a ton of Asian fantasies. I've read a few though, a few to, you know, recognize certain things I see as patterns within them, and it definitely makes me want to read more. I've actually been suggested a few other Asian fantasies by friends. Although, like I said, my cup is full of like non-romance for a while now, because as I said, I usually only read 1 or 2 every year, and this year I read 8, and they were a lot for me. Like, they were a lot for me to do. But next year in 2025 there isn't a J. Kristoff coming out, so I may be able to read something else. And I do have my eye on a few things I may try to squeeze in there as well. But that's not anything I make a goal for myself. I don't force myself to do it. I just each year try to be open to 1 or 2 books. And they're usually fantasy, or I've even done a sci-fi too. They're usually a fantasy, or if I will, tiptoe out of it. So yeah. But anyway, it was fantastic. And I bring this book up too because I know not all of you only read romance, you know, which is generally what my channel, what people come here for. If you are also willing to read other stories, I highly recommend it. What I will say is, okay, so it's not a romance. Some people feel like it's maybe not a happy ending, but that isn't what you should be looking for when you go into it. Like, I want to just tell you that, like, don't be looking for that. But at the same time, for the story that we were telling, the author very much telegraphs where we're going to end up at. You know, like, to me, when I started this book, based on what the title was and based on what's important to these characters, to me, I know what looked like not happily after, but what would be a peaceful end to certain characters. I knew what that would be, and I feel that Fondly really satisfied me with that. So I very much will be watching this author. She does have a book she's co-authoring coming out in 2025, and so I may try that one at least. But I highly recommend the Greenbone Saga if you're someone who can handle non-romance, if you like some fantasy, if you do like mafia style things. You'll definitely see what I mean when you start it. It definitely has the organized crime family, but with magic going on with it. And yeah, just, you know, buckle up, be prepared, because it is very painful, but it was very beautiful too. Okay, next up, there was my other 6-star read that I had, and this one is romance. And this is my favorite book by this author. It's my favorite mafia that I read this year when I look back, and I was just so impressed with where things went, like where this author went with this. And that is Sweet Prison by Neva Altaj. Try to hold it so it doesn't shine. But this is her 10th book in her Perfectly Imperfect series. It's also, I think, the biggest one. And this was a slow burn, angsty, dark, age gap, step-sibling romance, okay? But I wouldn't call it necessarily taboo, and I'll tell you why. But they're step-siblings in a very loose way, and it just worked for me. So this is called Sweet Prison, and our 2 main characters in this one are Massimo and Zahara. And Massimo goes to prison when Zahara, I believe, is like 3 years old, because her older brother is killed, and Massimo, the stepbrother, he murders the man who is responsible for his stepbrother's death. And things go, he gets a little bit betrayed, and he ends up going to jail for this. And he goes to jail for 18 years. And so we start this with like his POV, right? When he's I think he's like 18 or 19 when he goes to prison for this. And so he doesn't even know his younger stepsisters, but he does care about their mother. Like, he does like his stepmother at the beginning of this, you know, and cares about the stepbrother, but his younger stepsisters, like, who are they to him? Like, what do they mean to him or anything, right? Wait, and I have that backward. It's their stepmother, it's his mother, and then the stepfather is their dad. Sorry, I had it backwards, because while he's in prison, his stepfather, their father, is running the mafia for him, but it's supposed to be like through him. It's a whole thing. And how their romance gets started, it does not start right away, of course, and I don't even mean when they're kids, but I mean when she first talks to him, she actually sends letters. So this, for a good chunk of this book, is actually an epistolatory romance, because she writes a letter to him. I believe it starts as like a school assignment or something. She's supposed to write a letter to someone. I don't know, but she writes a letter to him, and he isn't going to answer it or anything, but he also doesn't have a ton to do in prison all this time. And eventually she writes him many letters before he ever writes her back. And the reason why he ends up writing her back is that she says something in a letter. She kind of has turned these letters almost into diary entries, because he's not answering her, but she keeps sending them. And he's reading them because, again, he doesn't have a ton to do. Might as well read his stepsister's letters, but he isn't planning to answer her. And again, she is, I think she's 15 or 16, maybe like 15 when she started writing him letters. I don't know, for this assignment. And there's something in one of her letters about her father, and it contradicts something that her father has told Massimo when he does his like weekly visits with him. And so now he thinks, maybe I can use these letters with Sahara to spy on my enterprises while I'm in prison and make sure no one's lying to me. So this whole thing gets started because he wants to use her as a spy. And so they come up, they have these different ways of sharing codes back and forth, and different ways of her sharing information with him. And that's what this becomes. For quite a few years, all it is he's using her letters that way, and he's not really paying attention to her for anything other than that. Though he does start to realize he cares about these letters more than he'd like to. And then things step up a notch, because Zahara's father ends up dying, and Massimo gets brought to the funeral by guards, and he actually sees his young stepsister for the first time in 15 years or so. So now she is, I believe, like 17, and he hasn't seen her in person ever. And he now sees this stunningly beautiful woman. Now, she does have this skin condition where she feels very shy. I love, the photo actually has it too. She has this, like two-tone skin condition. I know it has a name. Pardon me. Let me see if it's written here. Oh, I don't think that it is, but it has, the author talks about what it is in here. Yeah, it's talked about what it is in here, but she's obviously more self-conscious about it than he is. She actually makes her own clothes, and she wears a lot of clothes that cover most of her skin and everything, because she doesn't want people to see her. But he sees her for the first time as an adult at this funeral, and he is a bit shook because she's the prettiest woman he's ever seen. Now, let's be honest, he hasn't seen many women in the last 15 years, but he realizes this woman that he's been writing letters to is gorgeous, and she's his stepsister, and this is not good that he's having such feelings for her. So he really tries to now like rein it back in, these like feelings he's starting to have for her, but it's too late. And for Zahara, it's way too late as well. She's already into him. She knows he's using her for information. She's not stupid. She's done things for him to get him information that he needs. So she knows what she's been doing. And when he is finally out of prison, he has some mental issues and some control issues. And he even has almost this like split personality that he's dealing with. And this voice in his head that is his like demon kind of. But even though he knows he should send her away, he should stay away from her, he craves being around her, and she brings him a peace that like nobody else can. So yeah, and there are things he should do. He should find her a husband. He should use her for his political, like, stay within this mafia for power. But the thought of anyone else getting their hands on his Zahara, he's going to have a tough time. doing that. So I loved this so much. It is the slowest burn that she's ever written. It takes its time. There's a good amount of time of this book where he is in prison and the letters are happening, but it does also like go through time pretty quickly. But by the time he gets out, she has changed so much too, because she was this very meek, shy girl who hides her face, stays out of trouble, and there were things that she did for him to find out information and to, you know, test people's loyalties that forced her to be brave in ways she never would have done without his prompting. And so she became, you know, a much fiercer, stronger woman through doing this work for him as well. So anyway, there's so much to love about this. I enjoyed it so much. It is a bit slower moving than some of her other books, but I think the character work, the character building is her very best. You know, I really loved Darkest Sins, which does kind of connect directly with this one. You should read Darkest Sins before you read Sweet Prison, because that one is about her sister, Nira. Is it Nira in that one? Yeah. Who is actually the one who ends up taking over after her father dies until Massimo gets out of prison. And there's a lot happening with Nira and with Kai, who ends up being her husband. And there's lots of stuff going on in that one that is overlapping with this one, and that you may want to see the context from that side. So she even says in the beginning that most of her books you can read out of order or whatever, but you should start with Darkest Sins before you read Sweet Prison. So if anyone wants to ask, you can jump ahead to the end of this series, but I would start with book 9 before you read this one, just to give you a bit more context there. Okay, let's keep it moving along here to some other favorites. So then I read an arc of A Tempest of Desire by Lorraine Heath, and this one became one of my favorites this month. So this is her most recent release in The Scandalous Gentleman of St. James. This is a series she started quite a few years ago, and she's actually written a few series in between there, and she went back to this world. So what's cool is that if you've read a lot of Lorraine Heath's books, which I had read a couple in that series, but I've also read like the Parent series, because these connect with like Jack Dodger and these other series that she's written before. And so I definitely knew a lot of like the parents and the characters in this world. But this one is about actually a Viscount Langdon and then Marlowe, who she says she just goes by one name because she's actually a courtesan. She is a mistress, and she's been kind of a long time mistress to this one certain man. And she's also a balloonist, which is historically accurate. There were a lot of women who could fly hot air balloons at this time. And in the beginning of this book, our hero, Langston, he's actually been through a traumatic event earlier, like a year before. And he has what is called, I think, like train disease or train malady or something. He was in a train accident. And if we break it down, he has a traumatic brain injury of some kind. Of course, it's not being called that, but it caused some very interesting side effects. I don't want to spoil what all the side effects are, but one of them that is kind of obvious as a like person now, he definitely had a concussion, and a pretty serious one, because light and sound really affect him now. And so, and his family loves him very, very much, but he's ashamed with some of his weaknesses he has now. He used to be this very like gregarious, charming guy who he really liked to play cards and gamble a little bit. He wasn't anyone who ever like threw away his money, but he was good at cards. He was a card sharp, as it were. And he actually knows of Marlowe. He found her very beautiful, and he actually had the opportunity to actually win a night with her off of her, like, her benefactor or whatever, and he turned down the option because he was like, I don't want to win a person in a game. And that actually left Marlowe a little bit miffed, because even though she didn't want to be placed as a bet in a game, she was offended that he wouldn't want to spend the time with her, right? So it's a weird like back and forth between them, whatever. But anyway, he has this going on after this train accident happened, and he's not the same man anymore, right? As you may know, if you know someone who has chronic migraines or who's had concussion syndrome or is any of those things, it can greatly affect your life in very painful ways. And so he has this little island with a small home on it, and he will go there quite often because it's very quiet. He is self-sufficient when he's there. He makes his own meals. So he takes care of the fire. He, even takes care of a bit of maintenance that's there, and he just stays in the quiet there. And one night there's a storm, and Marlowe's balloon, she gets stuck in this storm, and she ends up on his beach. Now, I was a bit nervous in the beginning that this was going to be an amnesia story because it is said that he knew who she was. And I was like, oh no, is this going to be another Overboard scenario? Please, please don't be that. And it's not. She does not have memory loss when she wakes up, but she is stranded here, and it's the middle of a storm. And he does have a boat, but it's a small boat, and he can't take this boat back to the mainland in the middle of a storm. And so they end up stuck together for let's call it a weekend, but it's a couple nights. And there's a lot of banter back and forth. There's only one bed. There's only one fireplace in the place. So they're stuck around each other. And there's this weird dance because they were both attracted to each other, but she's somebody else's mistress and he is someone who turned her down before. So we're just in this weird, up in the air what's going on. And so what I found interesting, and I know this didn't work for some people, and I was worried it wouldn't work for me either. I'll tell you, I was worried too, because they are very attracted to each other. And Lorraine Heath lets us know that, right off the bat, that they're attracted and they would like to sleep with the other person. And you guys know that lately I don't love when we start physical forward. That's not my favorite thing to read these days. However, there are two reasons why it worked for me. Number one, it worked for me because she doesn't use horribly graphic language to explain that. And I say horribly, I don't mind graphic language, obviously, but she shows attraction in other ways, right? Which is something I'm always harping about. You don't have to say he's getting stiff in his britches or his cock is filling up every time he looks at her. You can say other things like his skin can get flush. Her skin can feel sensitive when he's around. There are other ways you can say they're attracted. And I feel that she did that very well. It's very clear that these two are attracted to each other. They're stuck in a small house together alone. She doesn't have any clothes except wearing one of his shirts because all of her stuff was ruined. And there are all of these things that, yes, they're going to notice each other physically, but we can show that in other ways. And I feel that we did that. They are often thinking about the attractiveness of the other person. It also works for me because they do have a prior knowledge of each other. They have interacted with each other before and been attracted to each other before. So it's not a 0 to 60 of there's this woman and I'm getting turned on by her immediately. There's a history of he's actually dreamed about her before, and since those interactions they had where he turned down the option to be with her, he's thought of her. So there's a history built in, so it doesn't bother me the way that some have. And then the other thing about this is this was very angsty and full of longing. There is reasons why Marlowe ended up as a mistress, and there's reasons why, this does have a mistress trope. She's currently someone's mistress, and he wants her to be his. But she's been a mistress for so long, and she's tired of it. She's tired of, she wants a happily ever after for herself. And at the time she became a mistress, she didn't have a choice. And she has had a good benefactor. She's only had one benefactor the whole time. And he's been very good to her, but he's now going to be getting married. And she just doesn't want to do that, So there's an angst in there of how could he be with her? So anyway, I've said enough about this book, but it reminded me again of how good the classic historical romance authors are. And this was where, this last month, how I've really been very excited for reading more historical in 2025. And they don't have to be new to me. I do want to find new to me authors, but the historicals don't have to be new, right? That's the fun part. They can be old. And so I'm very much looking forward to the historical romance readathon we're having in January. And if you watch my goal video, you'll know I want to try to read 50 new historicals in 2025. Again, they don't have to be new to me historicals in 2025. And reading Lorraine Heath just reminds me, I have a lot of Lorraine Heath I haven't read. I've read a good amount, but lots I haven't read. And just some of the classic authors, all their books are still waiting for me. And this was one that reminded me. So this had a Viscount. It has only one bed. There's forced proximity. There's a class difference, and it's a mistress trope. And I really liked this book. Boy, we got to move on here. So next I had an audiobook of The Dark Before the Light by L.H. Halloran. And this was a like double hitter for me because I also already had this book on a TBR. It was on a video I did, I think in the end of October. That was my Kindle Unlimited TBR that I had at the time. And this book was one that had popped up. I can't remember whether I saw a rec for it or not, but Amazon definitely was pushing it to me as a forbidden patient-doctor romance. And it's a psychiatrist and sex therapist romance. And I know that it said there was some like light BDSM involved in it. It had an Irish billionaire. The woman was a former dominatrix, but she now helps with sex therapy and things like that. And she's kind of the sex therapist to the rich and famous too. And this story is actually about her taking on a new client. And this client was someone that she knew briefly 16 years ago. And they actually met when her family was on vacation in Ireland. And she met him in a graveyard. And he actually like gave her this like edict of, you know, you can conquer anything, do hard things. And she's never forgotten that. Now, it might seem crazy that he would end up as her patient one day, but she has followed him. Like, she knew what his name was, and she's followed his rise to fame of he is a like scientist and inventor, and him and his brother run a company. And so she's kept an eye on him. And when her roommate from college tells her about this roommate from college is actually married to his brother, says that he really needs help. So he's now a widower. He lost his wife and unborn child in a pretty traumatic way. They were killed. And he's become a bit of a recluse and a drunk and a tiny bit of like substance abuses in other ways. And his brother, who is his business partner, basically kind of threatens him and is like, if you don't get help, I'm going to go to the board and get you removed from this because you are hurting yourself and you're going to hurt our company. So it's a bit of a tough love situation. And so he agrees to see this therapist. Now, he doesn't know that his sister-in-law has set him up with a sex therapist, but that isn't the only thing that she does by any means. And she's not only a couple therapist either. There's a lot more that she does, but that's what everybody pinpoints her as, is she's an ex-dominatrix and a sex therapist, and they all pigeonhole her into that. But she's a very interesting character. And so they begin therapy together, doing lots of different things. But there's also this intense attraction. And for her, she's always been attracted to him. And he doesn't at first know or remember her because this was, you know, a decade and a half ago that they interacted. But there's a lot between them. And this was very angsty, but it's forbidden, but it also wasn't like too forbidden for reasons you'll see as you read it. And I loved the stuff we got into with them, the like angsty parts of it, like where his pain and his grief is coming from, and you know, where a lot of her self-doubt came from, and how he helped her with that with only a few statements way back when, you know. And so there's just a lot of amazing things about the both of them, and I loved reading that. And here the narration was amazing. It was so good. And there is a bit of course, it's not a ton of BDSM, but there is some. And because she's been a dominatrix before too, he's like, I'm not gonna let someone spank me and tie me up. And she's like, that's not what this is about at all. But there are some scenes too where she actually has just recently started wanting a bit of dominance to be done to her. And that's never happened before. She's always wanted to be the one in control. And there isn't anyone that she really wants to be the one to dominate her until these two meet again after all these years, and they're kind of helping each other with that. So there's some great scenes where they switch up the dynamics. There is also a scene of pegging in this one, and it's hot, guys. Like, it's really hot scene. But I did listen to this one from Must Love Audio, and it was just perfect. Because, as I said, I had this one on my TBR. And so when it became an option to sign up for the ARC, I was like, count me in. I'm in. Let's go. So really. And then the last one I want to talk about actually just released. And this was another audio I had. I had this audiobook from Valentine PR, and it was Mr. Broody by Piper Rain. So I actually interviewed Piper and Rain for the release of Mr. Heartbreaker, which came out in November, I believe is when that one came out. It was October or November. And I have a little chat with them on my channel about the audiobook, and this has like a full cast duet narration to this. So there is the main characters, and then the men who all live in the Nest, which is this apartment building that all these hockey players live at. They're each like played by their narrator. So as we go through the series, the narrator who was that will be them the whole time. And then there's a couple female voices as well, but the female one does like change every time. Or I mean, will be the same for some of them anyway. But anyway, so this one was a second chance romance. And you guys know those are tough for me. They're usually have dumb reasons for breaking up, or I get really frustrated because the thing that broke them up wasn't dumb. It was really serious. And so then I'm like, how can you go back with this person who did this to you, you know? So it's a difficult thing when it's a second chance romance. But this one was so sweet. It's also a single dad, and he actually adopted his son, so there's not another woman or anything either. He himself was an orphan. He was raised by his grandparents, but he was an orphan, and he adopts a little boy. He had worked with a charity for a while for kids and like foster care and things like that, and he adopts a little 3-year-old boy, and now he's had him I think for 3 years in his life, and it's so cute. I love that. I love that he was a single adopted dad. He's a hockey player, and his friends like all help. It's this great community too, which is what's cool about the Nest. And when we got introduced to that in the previous one, and that book was more like fun. This one had a lot of heart to it. It really did, because these two, they were high school sweethearts. And more than that, as I've said, because he was an orphan, her family is his family, because while he was dating her all these years, the family loves him too. And so when they broke up, that was really hard because he lost more than just her. And the way that they broke up, just to put it out there, like the way they broke up was really, they needed to stretch their wings from each other. They'd been together for quite a while. Hockey was getting really like intense for him, and he was, you know, that was his focus. And she's a photographer, and she had some opportunities to travel and do that. And he knew that she wouldn't put her heart into it if they were still together. And so he actually like encouraged her to go. And so they broke up, and it was very kind of like bittersweet. And they did still like see each other when she'd come to town, until a certain point when like they fully have to break that off. And I don't want to spoil that part, but you know, they had broken up, but they were still each other's, like whenever they were in town, they were desperate to see each other, and they would hook up, and then it would be hard and they'd leave again. And again, I don't want to spoil why they like fully break up, but now it's been a few years and she's back in town. She has all these stories of all the places she's went, and he's there. Him and his son are there. And when they run into each other again after all these years, it's like this great pain because they want each other so badly, but is anything different enough that we can make it happen now? So I think I've said enough with that, but I loved it because the reason for breaking up, I understood it. It felt very realistic. So you don't have like animosity towards either of them, but you also understand that pining is still there. Like they are true love. They were meant to be. They just were very young and they weren't sure that it would work out, you know? And I know people in my real life that this is how life is, right? And I loved it that he was a single dad, but there's no other woman, you know? I love when that can happen. I don't love it when it's like a widow. You feel bad, but he's adopted this son. There's no other woman we have to worry about. And his little boy is so sweet. There's even a few POVs from the son's point of view in here, which were done so well. I love it. And this was just beautiful. This was a beautiful story. The main narrators for this one were J.F. Harding and Brooke Bloomingdale. And then there's a full cast, as I said. And yeah, the next one looks like it's going to be a runaway bride. It did get set up in the epilogue of this one, and I'm very excited. That one's going to be Mr. Swoony will be the next one. So this was great. I gave it 5 stars. It was truly beautiful. And Piper and Rain have just been, like, they were a solid author for me in 2024. I never read them before, and I read both some of their P. Rain titles, which are their dark romance, and I read their Plain Daisy Ranch books that they've had out so far, which were Cowboy, Small Town, and then this hockey series. And they've all just been like, okay, they've been solid books. The audios have all been really great. That's why I was listening to them. And then this one really like upped the level for me. This was very well done. And it wasn't all about the horn dog at all, you know, because they already love each other. And it's just that, like, can we risk our hearts again? Is it going to work this time? Because if it isn't, then we can't even risk it, you know, type of thing. So I loved it. I loved it. I hope you'll try it. I'll put links to it. Definitely recommend the audiobook if you like audio, because it was fantastic. So that is my wrap up of December, the final monthly wrap up of the year. As I said, I'll be back soon. I'm hoping to film it 2 days, so you'll see this gorgeous outfit. I mean, I put the fancy stuff on, so we're going to film more than one thing when we're looking this fancy. Okay, we got to do it. But yeah, definitely make sure you check out these books and make sure you subscribe to the channel. I have a lot of fun things planned for 2025. It's going to be amazing. And yeah, thank you so much for your support. I love you all so much. Thank you to my patrons and channel members who make this work for me. And I'm so blessed to have you all. Have a wonderful day, guys. Bye.